All things in nature relate to each other, turning over one another like a river flows from one generation to the next. Each generation has its mission, but all have a common desire, the desire to explore, to search, to understand. For countless generations, people have found this place to be a natural environment for seeking truths and gaining wisdom. Our awareness of the past is the foundation that can shape our vision for the future, a vision that lives in the heart of this story. In 1847, enthusiasm was about to spread across the country when gold is discovered in California. At the same time, a fortune of another kind was being sought in the middle of the nation. Land that changed hands among many people was now being occupied by settlers from the east. At a cost of 4 cents per acre, the first free state to be carved out of the Louisiana Purchase became known as Iowa. The early state founders were eager to bring what they considered to be refinement and progress to a wilderness that others thought of as primitive and remote. Just 59 days after statehood was established, the plans for a state university were confirmed. However, details such as its location were not so rapidly embraced. Many sites were considered with much political disagreement, such as the new state capital in Iowa City. Private colleges had opened their doors and failed in Iowa City, but a public school with the assistance of state funds might have a better chance of surviving. Was this town on the river a respectable place to construct an establishment of higher education?
Cities like Iowa City are productive of influences to which parents, as a general thing, would not desire to have their children exposed. Jasper County State Representative.
This concern was shared by many of the time, considering the town was located in one of the few counties where liquor was allowed by law. The state's population was expanding westward, and the more centrally located city of Des Moines became the new state capital. In order to save money, the legislature suggested moving the university into the Capitol building in Iowa City when it became vacant. Although selling portions of a generous 46,000-acre land grant from Congress helped pay expenses of the campus in the 1850s, funding was still tight for the operation of the Iowa University. The search for a university president was tedious and difficult. Finally, with excessive prompting from an exhausted governor and legislature, Amos Dean was hired. Head of the Albany Law School in New York, he agreed to take the position only if he didn't have to move to Iowa. Some early faculty fondly referred to him as the president in absentia. The official opening of the university came on September 19, 1855, 8½ years after it was established. At this time, there was very little on campus other than enthusiasm. It was primarily one building, the old Mechanics Academy, a 2-story building located near the corner of Iowa Avenue and Lynn Street. The Capitol building would be occupied by legislators for 2 more years. The university's first class included 124 students, 41 women and 83 men. Women were to be at least 14 years old to enroll, and men were to be 15. Education in this area was in the early stages. A preparatory school was established to help prepare students for college-level courses offered by the university. 2 months later, 2 large boxes arrived on campus. Ordered by President Dean, they contained about 50 books. These volumes were the first installment of the new university's library. A concern for the university's credibility was developing in public opinion because of the on-campus prep school and the fact that nearly every student was from the Iowa City area. At one point, the state university became labeled the Johnson County High School. Without a university president living on campus, there was no sense of direction or commitment. Amos Dean, along with most of the faculty, was discharged. With the exception of the preparatory and normal departments, it was decided that the State University of Iowa would have to close until more funds could be generated and more students enrolled. Although the short-lived Prairie University closed its doors in the spring of 1858, Dexter Edson Smith emerged as its first graduate. But the educational seed had been planted in the minds of the people of Iowa to keep the university alive. The university reopened its doors in the fall of 1860, and enrollment grew to 172 students. The University of Iowa was the first in the nation to admit women on an equal basis with men. Some trustees had submitted a proposal to exclude women, but the action was overturned. The country was about to elect a new president, and opinions and ideas were strong and flowing. Literary societies developed and gained popularity among the faculty and students. Male and female literary societies became a pillar of student life outside the classroom. To promote a more academic atmosphere, the Board of Trustees authorized the janitor to buy a dog to keep the grounds clear of livestock and stray hogs. As the Civil War broke out, another regulation prohibiting students from wearing firearms to class was established. It was no surprise to anyone that war-related tensions would soon transfer to the campus. Students were requested not to display any badges for either side. The university's second president, the Reverend Silas Totten, having taught in the South, was a prime target of resentment, although he remained politically neutral throughout his term. After countless assumptions by others that he was a Confederate sympathizer, President Totten resigned. Although a few classes were canceled during the war, the campus maintained its day-to-day activities. Chapel in the morning, and student drills from the military department in the afternoon. Meanwhile, daily battle accounts were posted and reported throughout the campus. In the prevailing turmoil created by the war, the young school was gradually maturing. Through its faculty, the credibility of the State University of Iowa was growing internationally. Gustavus D. Hinrichs, a graduate of the University of Copenhagen, was an expert in the field of science. He is credited with early design of the periodic table of chemical elements. Another faculty member, Samuel Calvin, was a leader in the field of natural sciences and the field of teaching. So dedicated to his students, he purchased equipment and books for them with his own money when university funding was tight. At the close of the academic term in the mid-1860s, the country had lost a great president. A service was held on the steps of Old Capitol, and the war between the states ended. A new type of student was now enrolling. The offer of free tuition to war veterans caused many to flock to Iowa City. The aftermath of the war was evident on campus. In one English class alone, there were 7 students with missing limbs. The veterans were no-nonsense, mature students with a particular interest in the scientific fields, an area of study which was rapidly expanding under the influence of Gustavus Hinrichs. Teaching, learning, and research spread throughout the main campus, which consisted of what was known as North Hall, Central Hall, and South Hall. The chapel was located in the upper chamber of North Hall, and the local press at the time called it the finest room in Iowa. The expanding volumes of the main library were stored in a back corner of the chapel. Central Hall became the new law school, which, under much opposition, had been relocated from Des Moines. South Hall became the medical department, which, under even more opposition, competed with a private school in Keokuk, Iowa. Other sections of the building were used as dormitory facilities. The campus was finally resembling a university. With the support of John P. Irish, a Democrat of the Iowa House of Representatives, the Iowa General Assembly backed the idea of a school of medicine at the university, as long as the department would exist on student fees and not encumber state funds. The task of administering the new school was placed in the hands of 27-year-old Dr. Washington F. Peck. The university opened a school of medicine with 8 women in its original class of 37. But just as soon as it began, an event occurred that almost closed the new school. Lack of funds was always a challenge at the university, and the anatomy department was no exception. Along with various supplies and instruments, there was a shortage of cadavers for proper medical study. One December evening, the caretaker and 2 medical students found the grave of a woman recently buried in a nearby cemetery. They removed the body from the grave and brought it to the basement laboratory of South Hall. Days later, when the body was reported missing, the caretaker's notebook was found at the gravesite. It was later discovered that the students hid the body in a haystack outside of town. The body was returned, but showed obvious signs of dissection. It was months before the scandal faded from view, but the medical school survived and later was able to acquire the unclaimed bodies of deceased convicts for study. In the spring of 1873, the legislature granted a request by the university to establish an on-campus medical school branch of Mercy Hospital from Davenport. With local citizens and the legislature raising $5,000, the now abandoned Mechanics Academy was converted into a 20-bed facility. Dr. Peck and 3 nuns worked hard to convert the building into a suitable environment to care for patients. A few weeks later, Iowa City's first hospital, Mercy Hospital, opened its doors. 100 miles to the west, a ruling was handed down by the Iowa Supreme Court.
A pupil cannot be excluded from any common school on account of race, nationality, religion, dress, or any other distinction.
The university's first woman professor, Phoebe Sudlow, arrived on campus in 1878 to teach English language and literature. She was the former superintendent of public schools in Davenport and a strong advocate of equal pay for equal work. Alexander Clark Jr. became one of the nation's first African-American law graduates. In 1875, Mary Humphrey Haddock not only was the first woman to graduate with a law degree, but was the class valedictorian. She went on to be the first woman to practice before the U.S. Circuit Courts. It was apparent the university was enjoying rapid growth. In 1878, enrollment was over 600, and the faculty was approaching 45 members. Revenue accumulated from a millage tax helped fund construction of new buildings such as Science Hall, the medical building, and a dentistry building, all of which included steam heat and running water. The university band even received uniforms. On Friday nights, many students could be found in the chapel for what was known as the walk-around.
A line of settees was ranged around the walls and a few placed back-to-back in the center. There was no ceremony, no receiving line. As soon as a few were assembled, the line march started. For the whole blessed evening, the company circled round the room in couples, dropping down at intervals to rest. Celia Currier, Latin instructor.
A positive spirit was beginning to develop throughout the campus. The colleges of dentistry and pharmacy were beginning, and the roughest sport played on campus among the students and faculty was baseball without gloves. Later, another new game called football was tested. It was banned on other campuses for being too violent. Rule 13 stated, no tripping, hacking, pushing, or retaining with hands, charging from behind, striking with fists, or unnecessary roughness shall be allowed. Projecting nails or iron plates on shoes are prohibited. The ball itself was so unusual in appearance that when it landed in a neighbor's yard, he attacked it with a knife. Although there were complaints about the rising cost of tuition, now just over $8 a semester, students somehow scraped enough together for a ticket to see Buffalo Bill. In 1887, as the newly appointed president of the university, one of Charles Schaefer's first acts was to meet with legislators. He broke down the dollar amount that other states were spending on students, illustrating how far behind Iowa was. He convinced them that by working together, their state university would be one of the finest in the nation. Schaefer was the perfect diplomat at the right time. he simultaneously gained support from the regents and the faculty, and enrollment grew.
I vow to search for and obtain an able faculty. All the rest is accessory. Charles A. Schaefer, University President.
Schaefer's promise to seek an able faculty was delivered when he successfully recruited several talented professors, including Carl Seashore, the first psychologist in the state. His influence would change the way graduate-level programs operated. As bricks were being laid on Clinton Street, Iowa City itself was changing. The St. James Hotel on the corner of Iowa and Clinton, with its gas chandeliers, was impressive and elegant and frequented by many university guests. Down the street, Whetstone's drugstore was established on the corner of Clinton and Washington Streets. The soda fountain became an immediate attraction for students. Close Hall, built in 1891, originally housed the YMCA and YWCA. On January 16, 1896, it was the site of the first university-supported basketball game in the nation, between Chicago and Iowa. Iowa lost 15-12, but enthusiasm for athletic competition was winning over the student body. Students were organizing athletic events such as gymnastics and fencing, and team sports like women's English hockey or field ball. By the 1890s, games were played on the new Iowa Field, located along Iowa Avenue, east of the river. Track and field, which took place at the fairgrounds on the east side of town, produced the university's first champion athlete. John Van Fleet Crum won 37 races in 1 year alone and crossed his last finish line with a degree in law. The Central Library had grown to over 33,000 volumes with the addition of periodicals. Even though it might have been the university's Renaissance period, there was still no permanent building for the collection. It was now haphazardly positioned over the chemistry laboratory in North Hall. There was a constant fear that if an experiment should go haywire, precious publications would go up in flames. An appeal was made to the Board of Regents to build a general library on campus. Their attitude was less than promising. Some contested that no building on campus was completely safe from disaster. A terrible hailstorm ruined several windows in South Hall not long ago. On a stormy June morning in 1897, a bolt of lightning burst through the clouds, striking the third floor of North Hall. A sudden fire broke out and raged through the upper floor to the library. Librarian Mary Barrett rushed into the building to rescue what she could. The fire department was summoned, and it was all they could do to contain the blaze. Civil War veteran Ira Alder rushed through the flames and rescued a battle flag donated by Civil War veterans of Company D. More than 25,000 volumes were reduced to ashes. One fireman was crushed by the ruins. The legislature only provided money for a new roof and to restore the few books that did survive. A few blocks away along Iowa Avenue, construction was being completed on the new 60-bed University Hospital. The hospital opened its doors in 1898 under the direction of practicing nurse Jenny Cottle and chemistry professor Elbert Rockwood. The new teaching hospital would provide students with an excellent clinical facility, including a 200-seat amphitheater. Zoology professor Charles Nutting was one who believed learning and research could not be confined to a room. He led several specimen collecting expeditions around the world, including a nationally acclaimed 1893 journey to the Bahamas with 21 students. The dream for a college of liberal arts was soon to be a reality. Not far from the old Capitol, ground was broken and construction was underway. President Schaefer looked on as construction progressed, confident that the course to move the State University of Iowa into the 20th century was set. But suddenly, the momentum of the past 10 years came to a halt as Schaefer's heart stopped beating. Charles Schaefer died at his desk on September 23, 1898, but the light he had shed on the university continued. No matter what events occurred, The faculty and the students remained the backbone of the system. Professor Calvin, head of geology, and McBride, head of biology, held classes in Science Hall. McBride and Calvin both conducted the largest classes on campus at the time. Carl Seashore's work in the field of psychology stressed experimentation that branched into other fields such as music. He was one of the first to develop a psychological laboratory equipped with recording instruments and operated by students. Across the campus, developments in new fields of study were emerging. In the twilight of the 19th century, the board located the person who would bring the university into the dawn of the 20th century. George E. McLean was the ideal candidate. The university's 8th president was a professor, administrator, and former clergyman.
The new university must be a crown of the public school system. Its faculty must be investigators as well as teachers, and must be willing to take a stand and make any sacrifice for the truth. George E. McLean, University President.
McLean's stand at the time was expansion. He stated the need for more buildings such as an assembly hall, an armory, a gymnasium, and a much-needed main library. He established a permanent university registrar, 12 new departments, and 33 new faculty positions. Later, he appointed Alice Young the first Dean of Women, a prime supporter of the suffrage movement.
I believe in co-education, with the accent on education. Alice Young, Dean of Women.
Early one spring morning, the entire town of Iowa City was awakened by an enormous roar. Chemicals in the medical building had exploded from a fire that was hopelessly out of control. In less than a few hours, everything was gone. Although it was a great loss, to some it was a blessing in disguise. The event proved to be a principal motivator to redesign the main campus.
The overwhelming majority of universities have hodgepodge buildings which are dropped here and there like ostrich eggs in the sand. At a great cost, we are rescuing this university from these defects. George E. McLean, University President.
The nearly completed collegiate department building was impressive and in architectural harmony with Old Capitol. The ideal plan was to maintain this harmony among other buildings on campus, and to maintain harmony with the Board of Regents, who would need to approve the plan. Students were enjoying the benefits of change on campus, as well as other developments. They were becoming more social. There was the freshman party, the sophomore cotillion, the junior prom, and the military ball. Each function may have started out with the waltz, but they usually ended with the tango, lasting sometimes till 3 in the morning.
I don't object to the tango, as long as it is done properly. Faculty chaperone.
One freshman couple was suspended for unbecoming dancing and forbidden to dance publicly in Iowa City for 1 year. These were exciting times for enthusiastic people who were eager to stay informed. In 1901, the first edition of the Daily Iowan came rolling off the press. Merged from the Vidette Reporter and another student paper, The Quill, the DI, as it was referred to, was an ambitious effort for the period. Daily events were reported, keeping up with the spirit of the times. It was apparent to University President McLean that the average Iowan saw the university as just another school among many in the state, an attitude reflected in the board as well. There had to be a way to encourage school spirit, promote the university, and maintain distinction. Rapidly growing sororities and fraternities now provided most of the social outlets for students. But there was a problem with some of their rowdy activities and hazing rituals. One fraternity kidnapped the class president and held him captive for 2 days.
School spirit in the creation of organized sporting events will curb most of the animalistic behaviors by these fraternities. Professor Isaac Luce, Political Science.
It was time to organize a university athletic department. Dr. Alden Kinnick was appointed as the university's first athletics director. The position was new and the requirements may have been sketchy because not only was Kinnick a physician, He also had a terrific singing voice. Kinnick led the University Glee Club, which was in great demand on campus and throughout Iowa City. Music echoed across the campus, and student demand prompted the establishment of a music department. Effie May Prophet started a school of music affiliated with the university, and soon it became an official department. As other departments and colleges were dividing and reinventing themselves, the collegiate department became the College of Liberal Arts. The professional schools, such as medicine and law, became their own colleges and extended into graduate levels. To maintain President McLean's goal of the new university, the grounds of the campus needed a major facelift. Another building was about to appear, the new Hall of Natural Sciences. But this time, it would be designed and positioned in relation to the campus of the present and the campus of the future. The new structure would be neighboring and similar in architecture to the newly completed College of Liberal Arts building, later named Schaefer Hall. However, there was one small obstacle in the way, an obstacle that weighed 6,000 tons: Science Hall. It was assumed the charming three-story red brick building would be torn down. But for economic and aesthetic reasons, it was decided that old Science Hall would be moved. Fortunately, it would not have to move far, only 105 feet across Jefferson Street, to be positioned on a sloping hill. The move was performed by a Chicago company armed with 1,000 jacks, 27 railroad cars of timber, and over 700 rollers the size of a short fence post. Workers lifted the building from its foundation, moving it less than a foot a day. At one point, the building had to be swiveled around the dental building, but it made it to the final destination in 6 months without a scratch. During the tedious journey along the campus, the building was kept perfectly level so as not to disturb the classes that continued to meet inside daily. Old Science Hall had a new location. Some years later, it would have a new name, Calvin Hall. The move to organize college athletics was the trend at many universities. A Western Athletic Conference was created, including the states of Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Iowa soon became a member, and sporting events at the university suddenly took a new attitude. Crowds of spectators were increasing, along with the athletic abilities of the players. Women's sports, sadly, were overlooked, along with other issues that needed to be addressed. When the football team went to play at one southern university, the host school allowed only white players on the field. At the time, McLean offered what he felt was a good compromise. He submitted to this exclusion policy on their field, but not on Iowa's. Dissatisfied with this arrangement, the school refused to play Iowa. The desire for a high-quality education was a public concern. Course duplication within the 3 state universities, particularly teaching and engineering, was argued within the state legislature. Nationally, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching was focusing on medical schools in Canada and the United States. Their spokesman, Abraham Flexner, was compiling reports about the condition and caliber of education these schools were providing. The general status, in Flexner's view, was poor. Even the university, with its new hospital facility, received low marks. 2 of the school's weak points were in the lack of patients available to provide adequate clinical education and the absence of a full-time staff. At this time, most of the faculty had part-time appointments along with a demanding private practice, some as far away as Sioux City. The Board of Education, which replaced the Board of Regents in 1909, started making arrangements to close the school. A group of doctors lobbied to bring the school to the capital city on the basis there were more sick people in Des Moines. As a result, the university administration took strong measures to attract a quality, full-time medical faculty. Meanwhile, the legislature was drafting proposals for state medical institutions to provide free service to needy patients. Board of Education Finance Committee Chairman and alumnus William R. Boyd also helped keep the school from dissolving. His influence with the Carnegie and Rockefeller Foundations made possible the crucial financial support needed for it to survive. The Board of Education was clearly defining its role as a controlling force without the president's input. In January 1911, Board President Trewin asked for President McLean's resignation, along with that of the president of Iowa State College at Ames. John G. Bowman was the first president born in Iowa, and at age 34, the youngest person to hold the office. During his tenure, a course in home economics was introduced, while a new sport, wrestling, joined the ranks of competition. The popularity of sports, especially football, was growing throughout the state. In 1912, the first homecoming game was a sellout with over 5,000 people. The Hawkeyes lost the game to Wisconsin, but it was the beginning of a tradition that would grow each year. On Saturday night during a game, score updates were received by telegraph and painted on the front window of Whetstone's drugstore. Crowds would gather outside while waiting for the next update. Another promising star at the time wasn't on the gridiron, but on the debate team. Sophomore Virgil Hancher led the university to an impressive victory over Northwestern. Off campus, the university's notoriety came from sporting events, but the University Extension Division was now beginning to reach out all over the state. Subjects in public health, social welfare, and business were being taught. A laboratory was established at Lake Okoboji. Suddenly, the university was gaining distinction as an important educational force throughout Iowa. In 1916, the thought of more buildings on campus was hard to imagine. Until now, 23 buildings had been constructed. The university's new president, Walter Jessup, proposed over 30 more. And what was once thought of as a frill for the affluent had now put 1 million people on the road, roads which were not yet paved. International events grew uglier as war spread across Europe. By the spring of 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Jessup, along with university presidents across the nation, gave the government the full support of their campuses. The curriculum was now arranged to get students quickly through the classrooms and onto the battlefields. In addition to coursework, all male students were required to drill before and after class. Government military personnel were brought to the campus to make sure students were ready and able to fight. Common opinion supported the war effort, but the presence of a military entourage on campus bothered some of the faculty. Construction for a military dorm, the Quadrangle, and an armory for training began. With its new editor, Mildred Whitcomb, the first woman editor of an American college daily, the DI kept the campus informed of war news and its effect on the university. Homecoming was canceled, along with several sporting events, and other activities made way to assist the war effort. But through it all, the faculty continued to go forward with teaching and research. In a time when education emphasized the sciences, Carl Seashore was beginning to build a bridge between science and art with his research. His dual role as a leading psychologist and dean of the graduate college set the path for the way research and graduate work would be conducted. One of Seashore's academic innovations was the development of the performance thesis. Students in the arts could create or perform a work, rather than compose a scholarly document. As the war progressed, faculty members were met by military personnel as they entered the campus. They were required to quickly show proper identification to guards before being allowed to enter university buildings. Not because of the war, but another threat. The deadly Spanish influenza was taking its toll on many. It was a worldwide epidemic that already had killed over 1 million people. On campus, there was a quarantine of over 1,000 patients. The afflicted filled the hospitals, the gymnasiums, and several fraternity houses. For over 2 months, the university came to a complete standstill. The terrible epidemic had finally run its course, claiming the lives of 38 people. 7 were nurses, who in the line of duty had fought their own deadly war. A dismal silence had fallen over the weary college town of Iowa City, but its core, the university, slowly reopened its doors as the duty of learning, searching, and understanding once again resumed. Then, at 2 in the morning on November 12, 1918, the silence was broken by the sound of the waterworks whistle. Germany had surrendered, and the war was over. By now, the country's economy was getting stronger and enrollment at the university was increasing. In 1920, the John D. Rockefeller Fund had $200 million available for medical education. Jessup called upon alumnus William R. Boyd of the board's finance committee for help. They proposed a new pathology lab. The proposal would first be passed through a prominent member of the Rockefeller Committee and a good friend of Boyd, none other than Abraham Flexner, the same man who years earlier had produced the report so critical of many of the nation's medical schools. Flexner was amazed by the request and quickly recommended they scrap the idea for the lab and instead ask for an entire new hospital. A $2.5 million grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, the largest grant ever awarded at that time to a tax-supported institution, along with a matching state appropriation, moved the project forward. 2 new bridges over the Iowa River and a new trolley service helped point the way west for the location of what would be the new hospital. Now that the university had a permanent, high-quality medical staff and a growing number of patients to care for, the university hospital was being recognized as one of Iowa's major health care providers. The University of Iowa Anesthesia Division was the first in the United States. In 1923, Mary Ross was the first in the U.S. to graduate from a university anesthesia department. In the early 1920s, many educators were interested in testing. Graduate College Dean Carl Seashore designed one of the first intelligence tests. The university eventually became a national center for the production and distribution of educational tests under supervision of Professors Green and Lindquist. The world was on the edge of a mass communications evolution. Motion pictures were still silent, but over 1 million homes across the country were listening to broadcasts on their radio sets. WSUI, the first educational radio station west of the Mississippi, was located in one room on the 3rd floor of the engineering building at the university. The station was operated by Carl Menzer, who held the post for over 40 years. It was certainly a time with plenty to write about, and the best place to read about anything was still the DI. It was only natural that a school of journalism be created. In 1926, the newly abandoned YMCA and YWCA building, Close Hall, became the journalism students' first home. The DI and the journalism school worked hand in hand. For students, the department supplied the theory and the paper supplied the practice. Students were ready to have a good time, and they did so at various dances and functions in and around the campus. Adelaide Burge's duty was to keep watch over the social and academic life of women students. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the university, she became Dean of Women in 1921 and held the position for over 20 years. It was no surprise that one of the busiest parts of campus was the northwest corner of Old Capitol, Dean Burge's office. In her dual role of mother confessor and guardian angel, she would advise university women on everything from how to earn extra money to whether or not they should elope.
A dean must be ready and willing to deal with every phase of college life which concerns the welfare of university women. Adelaide Burge, Dean of Women.
The death of the literary societies may have prompted a new beginning for the arts on campus. The debate team was mostly supported through the Speech and Dramatic Arts Department, headed by E.C. Mabee. Mabee was an intense perfectionist with a strong love for the theater. In the music department was Philip Greeley Clapp, composer, musician, teacher, and critic. The two craftsmen took the education of theater and music to new heights. Clapp formed a student orchestra which the New York Times praised as the best student orchestra it had ever heard. And Mabie's students went on to write and act for Broadway and Hollywood. Construction of the Student Field House, an indoor sports complex adjacent to the Armory, was underway, which meant the old men's gymnasium at the foot of Washington Street would be vacant. Now there was space for the ever-floating sections of the library. The new temporary home was sizable, but offered a few distractions, such as a leaky roof, an occasional bat, and collections of various flying insects. It was one of the few university libraries that handed out more fly swatters than fines. In 1927, construction of the impressive new field house was completed.
This is a time of sports for every woman on campus. Elizabeth Halsey, Director of Women's Physical Education.
The campus area around Old Capitol had the presence of academic distinction. What it didn't have was an official name. The nickname Five Spot just didn't seem to conjure up academic distinction in one's mind. A contest organized by the DI eventually fostered a more inspiring title, the Pentacrest, and the expression Five Spot quickly faded into obscurity. Then, in 1929, on Friday, October 28th, the U.S. stock market collapsed. The Depression hit the agricultural states hardest. Iowa suffered a major decline in land values and farm prices. Salaries at the university were severely reduced, and many positions and services were cut. Enrollment declined for the first time in years. The mood was bittersweet as the new football stadium opened. In a dark corner of the campus was a strange, flickering light. At its source was the world's first educational television station broadcasting sight and sound. The picture was transmitted by television station W9XK, and the sound was transmitted by the university radio station. In December of 1933, Jessup surprised everyone by announcing his resignation. The look and size of the campus had expanded and changed more with his administration than with any before. His policy of the triple threat faculty, those who could be teachers, researchers, and community leaders, defined in the minds of Iowans the great inspirational resource the university was to the state, and would continue to be for their children's future. Without much delay, Eugene Gilmore, the Dean of the College of Law, became the next president at age 62.
A university's greatest function is that of investigation and research. It is dedicated to the pursuit of truth. Eugene Gilmore, University President.
With the aid of the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations and support from alumni, construction of a few buildings progressed at a time when development seemed impossible. The art building along the river and residence halls such as Hillcrest were sturdy and functional at best, but were certainly welcomed additions. The reserved administration maintained a calm and steady course through a gloomy period of world history. But in the shadows of it all, there was one thing that kept everyone's spirits alive: a pig. When the Minnesota Gophers beat the Hawks in 1935, Iowa's Governor Clyde Herring presented Governor Olson of Minnesota a pig. Later, the Minnesota governor commissioned a bronze statue of the pig, and since that time, after every game between Iowa and Minnesota, the winner receives Floyd of Rosedale. In the era of Prohibition, at the height of the Depression, students were embracing the social life of college. There was the sophomore cotillion, the junior prom, and the senior hop. There was even an on-campus nightclub called the Silver Shadow. As the New York Times reported, they danced, they ate, they cheered the floor show, but they drank only soft drinks, no highballs, no cocktails or beer, for liquor is taboo. The field of literature was producing some of the most prolific authors of the day. The Writer's Workshop, which emerged from the School of Letters, came about as a creative outlet for students who wanted to express themselves on paper and were serious enough to accept professional criticism. Tom Williams, an ambitious young student, enrolled in Professor Mabie's experimental playwriting course. 4 years after receiving his degree, he wrote a play called The Glass Menagerie and later won the Pulitzer Prize for A Streetcar Named Desire. Students nicknamed Tom Williams Tennessee, even though he grew up in Missouri. Grant Wood, whose American Gothic hung in the Chicago Art Institute, was now teaching in the art department. Wood's national prominence as a painter was a prestigious feather in the art department's cap. Across campus, there was another work of art in the eyes of some. The Cockcroft-Walton Atom Smasher, one of the first in the country, was located in McLean Hall. This device was used for nuclear research by faculty and students. Students like James Van Allen, who was earning a PhD in physics. The world abroad was in the midst of change, as was the leadership of the university. President Gilmore had helped guide the university through the country's darkest time, the Depression, and now, because of age, he was required to retire. The president's office was now being readied for a new occupant. The new president, a former university student, was once the student body president. It was 1940, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected to an unprecedented third term as the country's president. Virgil Hancher would hold the president's office at the university for even longer. In Iowa Stadium, the main attraction was the Iron Men. The team acquired the nickname not only because they played both offense and defense, but because of their rugged defiance to injury. New coach Eddie Anderson earned an MD degree and supported himself through medical school by playing professional football for the Chicago Cardinals. The 1939 team included Erwin Prass, Iron Mike Enoch, Bruno Andruska, and a kid named Nile Kinnick. Nile Kinnick was clearly becoming the team's star player, leading the nation in kickoff returns and interceptions. On November 11, 1939, in Iowa Stadium, the beloved Ironmen would have to prove their mettle by facing the undefeated Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Kinnick ran the ball through the Irish line for a touchdown. Seconds later, he drop-kicked the extra point. Iron Mike Enoch was the driving force for Iowa's defense, but Notre Dame managed to score. When it was all over, Iowa had beaten Notre Dame 7-6. Iowa City erupted with excitement as it did with other football victories. Their team was now ranked 9th in the nation, and the best student athlete in the country lived on campus with them. On or off the playing field, Nile Kinnick was Iowa's favorite son. A Phi Beta Kappa honor student, Kinnick was a scholar as well as a gifted athlete. Freshmen were in awe of his presence as he walked through the campus, but they were most impressed by his unpretentious personality. Nationally, he was a prominent sports figure, voted top player by the United Press and named Athlete of the Year by the Associated Press over Joe DiMaggio of the New York Yankees. Kinnick received one of the top awards any student athlete could be honored with, the Heisman Trophy.
I'd like to make a comment which in my mind is indicative perhaps of the greater significance of football and sports emphasis in general in this country, and that is, I thank God I was warring on the gridirons of the Midwest and not on the battlefields of Europe.
Eventually, every member of the famous Iron Men team left for military service, including Coach Anderson. Nile Kinnick graduated with honors and enlisted as a pilot with the Navy. But in June of 1943, a sudden tragic loss stunned many around the country as well as those on campus. Nile Kinnick was lost at sea while making a forced landing in his Navy plane. Number 24, Iowa's favorite son, was gone. The declaration of war on Japan took some by surprise and others by storm.
The university dare not become an agent of propaganda, but should not hesitate to analyze and expound upon the fundamental principles of religious and cultural life that our civilization is built upon. Virgil Hancher, University President.
University of Iowa President Hancher issued a mandate that all freshmen and sophomore men train for ROTC. The university's own military division arrived within a matter of weeks. The U.S. Navy had chosen the university as an aviation training base. Faculty members were enlisting and offering their talents in the war effort in medicine, engineering, and other fields. Cadets from all over the country came to Iowa for pre-flight training. By the spring of 1942, there were over 2,000 cadets on campus, over 100 more than the original agreement. Nurses training was accelerated. Many joined the armed forces and were stationed all over the world. The university hospital struggled to cope with higher prices due to rationing of supplies, as well as a severe shortage of nurses and other medical staff. By the end of the year, over half the internal medicine faculty had entered military service. The university continued to support the war effort while trying to remain a university. The administration's educational theory at the time had a practical, career-oriented focus. This educational focus was being questioned. A steering committee was established to overhaul the liberal arts program. All students would now experience several areas of learning and also concentrate in a specific field of interest. Those entering professional fields would come to their field with a broader education. Some of the most profound editorials appeared daily as writers put their thoughts about the war in print. The entire Daily Iowan editorial staff of 1944 was made up of women. Dorothy Klein became editor, selected for the position over 4 men, and Terry Tester became sports editor. Later, Doris Campbell became managing editor. The DI reporters were the first on campus to receive war news, and they would be the ones to report it. Sometimes not putting the paper to bed until 4:30 a.m. Just 10 days after atomic bombs devastated Japan, a new semester at the university began. The veteran on campus was nothing new for the university, but the married student was. Emergency requests from colleges around the country alerted the federal government to the housing shortage. They remedied the situation with the Quonset hut and the one-room trailer unit. Trailer villages were born around campus and became unique little communities of their own. There was no question the vets were more worldly and experienced than the typical student. They created a new degree of excellence and competition among the general student population. Most colleges and universities were just not ready for the mass enrollment that emerged after World War II. By 1948, the official student population at the State University of Iowa had reached 10,550, almost a 20% increase from pre-war enrollment. Students knew that potential was directly related to effort, and the Iowa campus on the river was the perfect place to apply it. The art department had recently recruited such internationally renowned artists as painter James Liche and printmaker Mauricio Lizansky. Wendell Johnson was conducting breakthrough research in hearing deficiencies and stuttering. Women's athletics at this time was intramural rather than intercollegiate. Teams of students from the residence halls and the sororities competed in volleyball, field hockey, tennis, and basketball. College spirit on the campus always seemed to come out strongest at sporting events. But students needed a way to signify their spirit with a symbol or a mascot. Over the years, there had been several mascots. At one time, there was Birch the bear, but he drowned in the Iowa River. There was a dog named Rex who must have been popular because when he died, he was replaced by Rex II. In 1948, journalism instructor Dick Spencer created a little hawk character. There was a statewide contest to give this character a name. John Franklin of Belle Plaine took the mythological name of Hercules and shortened it to Herky, Herky the Hawk. President Hancher shouted, "Let the work begin." On May 12, 1949, ground was broken for the new main library. If all went well, students would finally have a comprehensive information center located under one roof. A former graduate student engaged in early rocket research and the study of cosmic rays returned to campus. James Van Allen became head of the university's physics department after working at the Applied Physics Lab of Johns Hopkins University. One of the early launch pads in space exploration was the university's football stadium. Raccoons, as they were called, reached heights of 80,000 feet. When the stadium was not being used for space exploration, the football team took the field. New coach Forrest Evashevsky was bringing his team of Hawks into the national spotlight. March 24, 1956, the game for the national championship in college basketball pitted the University of Iowa Hawkeyes against the University of San Francisco Dons and their 6-foot 10-inch center, Bill Russell. The Hawkeyes were defeated 83-71. But one of the finest college basketball teams in Iowa history was Bucky O'Connor's fabulous five: Logan, Kane, Seaberg, Schaff, and Sherman. The new semester brought with it another new group of young minds the faculty would inspire and challenge. The modern breed of students brought with them a unique culture. Rock and roll music was shunned by many, but others found it a sound hard to ignore. However, the biggest sound on campus was from the roar of the crowd at the Iowa Stadium. The football team was in its element and primed for victory. The 1956 schedule was a dream, with 6 games on the Hawks' own turf. By season's end, the football team was going to play in the Rose Bowl for the first time in the history of the university. New Year's Day, 1957, Iowa met Oregon State. Early in the first quarter, Oregon State turned the ball over after a vicious hit by Alex Karras. In just 5 plays, the Hawks had scored. Oregon State fought back with a 66-yard scramble down the field, but Iowa's defense with Karras and Succi held firm. The Hawkeye offense with Kenny Payne and Randy Duncan rallied, and at the final gun, the Iowa Hawkeyes had won the Rose Bowl 35-19. But another ball was hurtling through space in the fall of 1957. Circling the Earth's atmosphere was a 184-pound sphere equipped with a radio transmitter. Sputnik, although a great technological feat, carried no scientific instruments on board other than a tracking device. But when Sputnik went into orbit, everything changed. The U.S. government and military combined resources to get a satellite off the launch pad. Within days, Professor James Van Allen, head of the university's physics department, and his team were called on. Because of his experiences with previous rocket experiments, Van Allen was chosen to fit the miniature space capsule with test equipment. On January 31st, 1958, the Army's Jupiter C rocket was ready for liftoff. In its nose cone was the Explorer satellite, and in the satellite were instruments designed at the University of Iowa.
How did we learn of these invisible belts in space? How are we exploring this region, and why? What are we finding out there?
Later, the first major scientific discovery of the space age became known as the Van Allen radiation belts. Back on Earth, the campus was cheering on the football team once again as they won their second Rose Bowl title in 1959. In November of 1959, the man who had organized a boycott of segregated buses in Montgomery, Alabama, spoke on campus, advising students to break down the subtle barriers of racism and discrimination. The Iowa University had always admitted students without regard to race. Even so, it still struggled with many of the same discrimination practices allowed by institutions around the country. The university required approved housing for undergraduate students, yet virtually no minorities were provided university housing until after World War II. A tradition among conference schools barred African Americans from participation in wrestling. Ironically, the first African American to win an NCAA wrestling championship was Simon Roberts, captain of the Iowa team. In 1956, Philip G. Hubbard became a tenured full professor, the first African American to do so at the University of Iowa. 17 years earlier, at the age of 16, he enrolled in the College of Engineering. Hubbard intended to support himself by shining shoes in the basement men's room of the Jefferson Hotel in Iowa City. Dean Francis M. Dawson later recommended the freshman for a position at the Institute for Hydraulic Research. At the time, virtually no minority students were offered employment opportunities on campus. He received a degree in engineering, and after his discharge from the Army, returned to the university to join the faculty in teaching and research. Professor Hubbard would later write, "I was simply a member of the human family, and only later did I learn that an irrational taboo had been dishonored." Judy Clark became the first woman student council president, and there was evidence that as the new decade of the 1960s approached, the once silent generation was finding a voice. The elements of change usually affected the university in a direction providing growth and discovery. As in decades before, a change in attitude was accompanying the 1960s, but unique from the past was the bold new way it was being expressed. Size and resources were the most obvious changes on campus. The student population had reached close to 11,000. Research grants had multiplied, and the university was now considered a $48 million enterprise. Over half the degrees in the university's 114-year history had been handed out by Virgil Hancher. Hancher now had the distinction of holding the longest term of any university president, at a time when one of the youngest presidents in U.S. history was just beginning his. On campus, the issue of mandatory ROTC training was creating a defiant attitude among students. Demonstrators appeared outside the Union during the military ball to protest increased military aid to Southeast Asia. To many, military affiliation with a place of higher learning had always been a subject for debate at the university. As classes resumed after the holiday break, Virgil Hancher announced his retirement. He had been president for 24 years. He led the university through a variety of changes and developments, dedicating most of his professional career to education.
Today, we, both you and I, stand at the threshold of a great adventure. Much of your life is before you, much of mine is past. But I like to believe that the world always beckons to the young at heart. And if that be true, my heart tells me that I can join with you in hope and courage as we face the uncertain future. Virgil Hancher, University President.
Howard Bowen's approach to education as the university's next top administrator was a contrast to the Hancher years. He urged students to seek the truth and search for practical solutions to the nation's problems.
The university is a house of intellect, not a house of propaganda or political action. Howard Bowen, University President.
Regardless of President Bowen's view, student demonstrations were becoming more visible, and some of the faculty were becoming more involved. There had been a handful of fires on campus over the years, none having an impact on the nation, until the one started by student Steve Smith in 1965. Smith became the first student on a college campus to burn his draft card. Later, Smith was given 3 years probation, but the seed of protest had been spread. As the work on campus continued, a group of aspiring writers were gathering in one of the Quonset huts still on campus. Since the 1930s, the Writers' Workshop influenced such writers as Kurt Vonnegut and John Irving. In 1967, under the direction of Paul Engel, the workshop's influence would be felt around the world with the formation of the International Writing Program. As the academic semesters of the mid to the late 60s unfolded, it seemed that many of the rules from the past were being seriously questioned. A large on-campus demonstration took place November 1st, 1967, involving Marine recruiters, anti-war protesters, and counter-demonstrators. Anti-war protesters blocked the Union entrance to the Marine recruiters' booth. Counter-demonstrators broke through the line, and a fight broke out. Dean of Academic Affairs Phil Hubbard pleaded with the group to stop the violence, but it took city and county officers to restore order on campus. 108 people were arrested. As the semester continued, more demonstrations took place, and although many were nonviolent, the conflict over military organizations on campus escalated. As the academic year ended, 400 graduates of the class of 1968 wore crosses protesting the war and racism. The next fall, anguish over Vietnam was still on the minds of many on campus and around the country. In January, the university's 14th president announced his resignation.
I have valued and enjoyed my contacts with students. Those student affairs are never dull these days. I have found our students to be capable and promising young men and women. Howard Bowen, University President.
A promising candidate for the office emerged from the faculty, and in March of 1969, Willard Boyd accepted the position. Although he maintained some of the ideals of the Bowen administration, President Boyd publicly spoke out against the Vietnam War, believing this was not the time to become part of the silent majority and that a university must be a marketplace of ideas. He broke from tradition by not living in the president's house and preferred to be called Sandy. On campus, demonstrations continued, along with some instances of vandalism, causing the president's office to be moved and Old Capitol to be closed. Protests were not limited to the war. In the spring of 1969, 4/5 of the African-American members of the football team quit spring practice in protest. They felt there was discrimination in the program. In the summer of 1969, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and President Nixon pulled 35,000 troops out of Vietnam. A calm had swept over the university, and a new shuttle bus system was transporting students around the campus. Then, one evening in 1970, President Richard Nixon informed America that the U.S. was going to invade Cambodia. Students, further angered that the war would escalate, demanded the ROTC facilities be removed from the campus. The news of students being shot on another university campus by National Guard soldiers shocked the University of Iowa community. Kent State became a symbol of university youth in turmoil, and immediately that turmoil reached other campuses across the country. A week-long demonstration broke out at Iowa. 300 to 400 demonstrators marched to the National Guard Armory, breaking windows, blocking traffic, and damaging property. A few days later, a widespread protest unfolded, with crowds estimated at over 2,000. On May 9th, Governor Robert Ray ordered National Guard troops to restore order in Iowa City. The troops were stationed outside the campus limits. Evening Pentagrest rallies continued with sometimes as many as 1,000 participants. President Boyd called for an early end to the school year. There would be no graduation ceremony, and students could accept their current grade as the final one or accept an incomplete. As a result, 11,796 students packed up and left the chaos on campus. As the protests settled down, the National Guard pulled out. The remaining seniors accepted their degrees, and another semester at the university came to an end. As the fall of 1970 approached, so did a new group of students. Once again, the duty of learning, searching, and understanding would begin. The war in Vietnam was winding down as more troops were withdrawn. As the 1970s developed, it appeared to be lean financial times for the university. However, the rewards of a $5 million grant from the National Science Foundation were being realized. The grant, acquired by Vice President Dwayne C. Spriesterbach, established a Center for Excellence in the Biological Sciences. Although during Boyd's administration few building funds were allocated, several facilities were near completion. The College of Nursing building, constructed on a limestone bluff overlooking the river, was completed, and the School of Dentistry, also located on the west side of the river, was finished. The University Symphony, under the baton of James Dixon, introduced the public to a beautiful new performance hall. Hancher Auditorium became a regional center for the performing arts. Through the years, it was apparent that the key to the university's overall success was in the people it attracted. But there was a sudden realization that a number of talented individuals were being eclipsed by prejudice on the basis of race or gender. The Boyd administration, more than any before, embraced the move for human rights on campus. Under the leadership of John Colleton, the largest teaching hospital in the nation was growing. It launched its own $475 million capital improvement program to replace old facilities at no cost to the state.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Iowa Fieldhouse and basketball.
As political conflicts of the past drifted away, the interest in athletics began to resurface. 50 years before, Elizabeth Halsey promoted sports for every woman. This ideal finally developed into women's intercollegiate athletics. Iowa's program began under the direction of Christine Grant. Women's athletic programs flourished, winning several Big Ten championships. Basketball teams under Coach C. Vivian Stringer became a national power, as did the field hockey team, winning the NCAA title in 1986. In the years to come, fans would watch some of the best student athletes in the country compete. The Iowa wrestling team under Coach Dan Gable became a national power, winning championship after championship in NCAA wrestling. Dr. Tom Davis would become known as Iowa's winningest men's basketball coach. Iowa, a state without professional sports, desired that same level of excitement. The old stadium had a new name, Kinnick Stadium, but the football program needed more. The team had not enjoyed a winning record since the days of Coach Evashevsky. Then, a Texan came to Iowa in the winter of '79, and changes took place. He made changes to the field, changes to the uniforms, and changes to the way the team drilled. But what he changed most was the team's record. The Hawks started winning, instilling a newfound pride in the football program and the university. Iowa's space physics program was developing research in plasma diagnostics. The university's Department of Physics and Astronomy conducted experiments on board several space shuttle missions. In just a few short years, the age of Aquarius had suddenly become the age of high tech. Weig Computing Center became a hub of technology, and every student in one way or another was influenced by its presence on campus. Affecting people in the state most was an agricultural collapse. Prices were down, and farmers were facing foreclosure. State funds were especially slim for education. In 1981, Willard Boyd left the university to become director of the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. As other administrations did during the Depression of the 1930s, newly appointed President James O. Friedman found support outside the state legislature for the university. With the University of Iowa Foundation, he helped establish the Iowa Endowment 2000, a fund to support faculty chairs, graduate fellowships, and advanced study programs. The university was focusing on itself as an investment to others internationally. But the mission of learning, searching, and teaching continued to be the backbone of the campus. In over 130 years, the university had 16 presidents. Hunter Rawlings III was the 17th. He saw the university as an asset to the cultural and economic development of the citizens of Iowa. He promoted the benefits of the university around the state and fostered the establishment of a research park on the university's Oakdale campus. The concept of the research park was to use the university resources to nurture new, innovative businesses from within the state and around the world. By the early 1990s, the state's economy had become more stable, and enrollment had exceeded 26,000. New facilities and faculty members were a promising addition to the university. For students returning or those coming to the campus for the first time, there was much to gain. But there was also a terrible loss. A tragic shooting took the lives of 3 faculty members, an administrator, and a graduate student, and seriously injured another student. In early November of 1991, the campus pulled together to mourn with family and friends. With each new generation, a unique and vibrant spirit emerges. As for the university, it was a time of realization and fulfillment. By 1994, the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, still the nation's largest university-owned teaching hospital, was ranked among the top 5 in the country. Innovative developments in training and simulation led to a national center for study. The growing College of Business Administration found a new home adjacent to the Pentecrest. Maintaining McLean's earlier philosophy of architectural harmony, the new structure blended the traditional with the modern in its design. In late 1994, another administration was drawing to a close. President Rawlings resigned to take a position at Cornell University, and once again the search for administrative leadership was on. As the fall of 1995 came to the campus, the presidential search ended. Mary Sue Coleman became the first woman president of the University of Iowa. As a new century approached, another milestone had been reached. The University of Iowa was now 150 years old. The once unstable academic venture on the prairie had ultimately proven itself to the state, to the nation, and throughout the world. For the past century and a half, this has been a place where ideas have been shaped, examined, and sent forth into the world community. Ideas that have come from individuals with various backgrounds and experiences throughout the decades. Their thoughts, their actions, their names symbolize the struggles and triumphs of another time. They provide the wisdom of today and the inspiration for tomorrow. Each individual who has touched this place in the past has made a contribution to its future. Another administration begins, interpreting the needs of the day and supplying its vision for the future. New students enroll, go to class, to learn, to experience, and to question it all. Researchers spend hours uncovering groundbreaking discoveries, discoveries that will eventually add another piece to the puzzle of the unknown. Over time, the elements may change, but the process remains the same. A process that continues as each generation passes its wisdom to the next, always in step with its particular mission. The mission to explore, to search, to understand, to seek the truth, in a place that over time has become known as the University of Iowa.